Shit, you know what's going on. You know the truth. 300 jury and above. You already know it's with me. Pull up NASCAR, I'm a speeder. I don't need her. Don't ask to play ball with me. I'm Derek Jeter, crushing snakes in my bathing apes. Got jungle fever. I just put 5 ounces in a 1 liter. Don't ask how much my jury costs. I hate dumb people. You don't know who shot your friend. We don't either. I could do a song with whoever I want. I'm from LA, so I stay with a gun. Niggas better watch they mouth when talking to me crazy. You don't know my homies shoot up babies. I got 3 Ks, I've been Ku Klux lately. You wanna fuck me, bitch, you won't pay me. I got 3 Ks, I've been Ku Klux lately. My homies is crazy, they'll shoot at babies. I've been driving whips out the DuPont lately. I've been hearing I've been doing too much lately. I got 3 Ks, I've been Ku Klux lately. My homies is crazy, they'll shoot up babies. I've been driving whips out the DuPont lately. I've been hearing I've been doing too much lately. Shit. I've been driving whips out the DuPont lately. Shit, man. My homies is crazy, they'll shoot up babies. I just put a drum on the K, I've been tripping. Nigga breathe wrong, I'ma chip one of these niggas. I'm from California, LA to be specific. I'm a big dog, nigga greet me as I'm Clifford. I just caught a body in a party with the Clippers. I want Mei Ling, So Young, and her sister. Nigga come I'm tripping by the bitch, I'ma chip him. We take camera phones in the booth cause bitch is tricky. Age ain't nothing but a number, the 17 is with me. If he graduated then his 17 gon' hit him. I pull up in a super sport, I had to go and get him. Can't talk about what happened next, just Lord forgive me. I got 3 Ks, I've been Ku Klux lately. My homies is crazy, they'll shoot at babies. I've been driving whips out the DuPont lately. I've been hearing I've been doing too much lately. I got 3 Ks, I've been Ku Klux lately. My homies is crazy, they'll shoot up babies. I've been driving whips out the DuPont lately. I've been hearing I've been doing too much lately. Shit, man. I've been driving whips out the DuPont lately. Shit, man. My homies is crazy, they'll shoot up babies. Shit, man. You know what the fuck going on, nigga? 300 on and above, 2 whips. Like, what's next for me? Like, I'm not playing with you niggas, I'm from LA, nigga. Nigga better not tell me nothing, I do songs whatever the fuck I want to, nigga. Yeah, at the end of the day, y'all gotta come out here. Shit, we don't gotta go nowhere else. Stop playing with me. I'm not the one to play with. Yeah. Put a drum on that, my youth.
We Japanese still. You getting cooked in front of your family? Like a Japanese meal. It's Yashup Hibachi, and none of you niggas can stop me. But can't help but watch me. Let's get back to this business here, man. You got certain individuals making troll accounts, Legion, We Are Many. You never know who the hell you're talking to on Facebook, right? But I was like, all right, let me entertain this real quick. I could probably make a video about it. So I just keep responding until they give me, enough content to review. And then I go and I just expose it to my audience. So there's nothing different here going on. So we got another victim. So let's do this. Let's go to my Facebook and just share the conversation that I had with this guy. And these people make it too easy. They make it too easy. You guys make it too easy for me to make content on this. Jacob Israel posted in his group, Jews versus Hebrew Israelites, let's debate. They're just a cesspool of racists from black Hebrew Israelite perspectives and white Hebrew Israelite perspectives and everything in between. It's just a bunch of racism and colorism. I mean, the post is pretty much trying to incite colorism here. And he says the ancient people of Sudan, and you can see the different depictions there. It's most likely Christian depictions. And I guess he's trying to pass them off as ancient. What do you mean by ancient? But anyway, that's besides the point. I left the comment here. We blow this up here so you guys can see this clearly. West African groups have connections to the Sudan genetically. And then someone responded with a name like Jeffrey Dahmer. This is obviously a troll account, and I noticed that from the beginning. I'm like, yeah, I'm talking to a troll. Who would name their account that except the troll, right? It says, yup, to Nilotic and South Sudanese groups, whereas Northern Sudanese and ancient Kulubnarti in 4000 BP, Kadruka and Sudan from Sudan have no affinity to West Africans. They have a far greater affinity to Levantine groups, North Africans, and East African pastoralists. And this is what gets these people in trouble. It's always absolutism. It's always no or all. It's those two extremes. They never give themselves room to be wrong or nuance. It's always got to be their way or the highway, and that's just not how science works. Science is not deterministic; it's probabilistic. Keep trying to remind guys that. So I respond. I was like, okay, I can make some content out of this. So let me see what I can drag out of this individual, right? So I just respond something light. I say, I wouldn't say no affinity. West Africans are literally connected to Eurasians as well. For example, Dinka, Mercy, Digital. That was supposed to say the Dizzy. Autocorrect made it digital instead of Dizzy, right? And the Amharic. And the reason why I showed that because those groups are known to have Eurasian influence as well, and West Africans connect to those people. They connect to the Mercy and the Dinka, the Dizzy, and the Amharic peoples. They connect to those people, which we covered in shows and times past and prior episodes. Then he responds, connect to Eurasians in what way? Look how the dark blue at the bottom, which consists of West Africans and Sub-Saharan African clusters away from Eurasians, from both West Eurasians and East Eurasians. So what affinity? So this is what they do. They love grabbing graphs and pictures and stuff from studies. Don't even tell you what the relevant study is showing. This is obviously showing you modern populations, right? And of course, we are removed from Eurasians in present day times. No one's making that argument. We're not in those areas mixing with those people. So why would we be? Doesn't make any damn sense. So let's go back to the conversation. I said they harbor genes with East Africans and Eurasians. And then he says, who's going to look at this PCA? See, he keeps trying to pigeonhole to this PCA about modern populations. Of course, we are genetically far off from present day Eurasians or West Africans are, because I have a lot of Eurasian genes in me, right? West Africans specifically in present day times are drifting away from Eurasians. We understand that. This doesn't help your argument, which we're going to talk about a little later here. It says, who's going to look at this PCA and be like, oh yeah, West Africans have an affinity and harbor genes with Eurasians. You cluster furthest away from all other populations due to Eurasians. Whatever genes you harbor is significantly less than what everyone else has, hence why they all cluster closer to each other and you don't and form your own distinct cluster. And I respond, they do have Eurasian genes, which is the argument. The argument isn't, oh, the present day West Africans cluster into their own distinct cluster. We understand that. The argument is they harbored Eurasian genes. You guys always do this trying to move the goalpost fallacy and trying to change and alter things. What you said was no affinity, and I can prove they do have affinity. He says they do have Eurasian. I say in response to this troll account, Jeffrey Dahmer, they do have Eurasian genes, Yoruba, Fula, Wolof, etc. They all have ancient Eurasian admixture. Then he says, so even with this so-called Eurasian input, West Africans cluster that far away from West Eurasians and East Eurasians. Wow. And this proves he doesn't understand science. He's not scientific literate. He just posts and snips pictures. He doesn't really understand what's going on here. You can have a community that is related to X population, but in present times, or ancient X population, in the present times have a completely different autosomal breakdown. That's completely possible. Like Japanese people with the D haplogroup, they are closely related to E haplogroups, but they have a completely different autosomal profile than, let's say, the North Africans with EM. Is it EM81? Those E groups, E1B1B groups, or E1B1A groups, completely different profile, even though they're anciently related. So this is like Genetics 101, and he doesn't understand that. He says, wow, you clearly don't carry much Eurasian input as North Africans pull way closer to Eurasians and even East Africans, whilst you form a cluster all the way at the bottom further than everyone else. Again, using modern population density to form his whole argument. It says, so how so I said, because West Africans have ancient Eurasian DNA, you're using modern day populations. Those populations retain those affinities because of recent admixture, as opposed to West African groups who mix primarily with Paleo African types. And this is pretty much basic, simple stuff that, if a third grader would get if they just took the time to read the relevant material, which he does not. He just grabs pictures and just runs with pictures. So what I'm basically telling him is the admixture events are old in West Africans, not yesterday. As far as North Africans and Eurasians, they've been there for during recent times. They're still admixing with the same populations. They're able to retain those genes. You begin to drift once you go away from the source populations. I mean, this is basic stuff, simple stuff. And I always find myself having to teach these WHIs, BHIs simple concepts because they're not reading it to learn this stuff. They're not learning it. They're going in with their racist presuppositions and trying to, confirm or concretize their racist presuppositions. It says here, he responds, so how ancient is the Eurasian admixture in West Africans for you to lose so much of it? And how recent is the Eurasian admixture in North Africans and the East Africans for them to retain so much? Then I respond, ancient West Africans have moved away from those populations that have those genes. Wolof, the Jola, and Fulani all share signals of Eurasian DNA from around 3,000 years ago. These groups mix with locals now. Their autosomes reflect that. Same thing with European Jews. They moved into Europe in the Common Era, and now more than 60% of their genes is European. This is basic, simple stuff, using another population to show you that your genes can drift. You do not retain genes indefinitely. If you go away from the original population or the population that harbor those genes and begin to mix with a foreign group or out group, you're going to change your autosomal profile. It's inevitable, right? And we see that with European Jews. We know they come from the Levantine region because of their paternal haplogroups. That when you check their autosomal profile, it's like 60% European because they've been there for about 1,000 years. Now, if you look at it, just use the same math. They've been there about 1,000 years on average, and they got 60% European. We're talking about these admixture events happening 3,000 years ago or older, and you expect them to have large amounts of Eurasian DNA? That's silly. That's silly. And that just shows you don't have an understanding and grasp of the field of genomics. That right there just tells me everything I need to know. I said, this is a simple concept to get. If you radiate and mix far from the areas of population with those genes, you will drift. Then I respond again, yeah, that's because they are more endogenous. In modern times, they gained that 60% affinity within the last 1,000 years ago, which is significant. In 1,000 years, they have drifted severely from Levantine autosomes. So times that by 3, and you get the same effect, but to a greater extent. Another example is the SSA component in all Jews. It dates back 3,000 years ago. This is simple to understand. The reason why I brought that up, Tim, is because they have ancient sub-Saharan African genes within modern Jewish populations that is very, very old, and they only retain about 3.5% of that. Why? That lets you know how old it is, because DNA degrades over time, populations drift. Once they drift, the autosomes change. Very, very basic, simple stuff to understand, because how do you get autosomes? From admixture. And if you're admixing with other populations, let's say Europeans, East Asians, you're going to be more similar to those groups. You're going to drift and cluster with them. It's just that simple. This is why the Jews are 60% Southern European. Jeffrey Dahmer says, multiple by 3, that would equate to 3,000. So you're claiming West Africans were Eurasian 3,000 years ago back, and then mixed with Paleo Africans? Sure, most bogus thing I've heard today. Then I respond, no, I'm claiming that the affinity to Eurasians would have been stronger in the past. We can only infer the past, seeing that we lack time machines. And this is why you can't be deterministic with science. You have to be probabilistic. These people want to be deterministic and say, no, this can't be possible. No infinity, and using these words like no and all, those are not that's not scientific at all. Again, he's showing that he's a dilettante and he's not really studying this stuff. So let me keep reading. And he responds again, there was a direct gene flow into North Africa and East Africa, and the dates are provided in the image. And what's funny about that is his whole attack, we already know it's about EM2, E1B1A. And E1B1A was in East Africa and in North Africa in ancient times. We can prove that. There's literally papers written on that. All right. One of the clades, E1B1A2, is in East Africa. And they speak our Afro-Asiatic dialect. So it's just so strange how these people, you just know they're not reading this stuff. You just know, you can just tell by the way they frame their questions. Well, the way they frame their statements and their attacks, you can tell that these guys are not studied. These are dilettantes we're dealing with. It says here, there was a direct Eurasian gene flow into North Africa and East Africa, and the dates are provided in the image I attached. See, they always use images. they never can give you direct quotations because the direct quotations pretty much kills their arguments. I remember having a discussion, presenting some information, and 93 went on Garfield's channel and says, I don't know if the brother read the book because that book is full of white people. And I'm like, are you going to just look at the pictures, or are you going to read what the book actually says about the Negroid Jews amongst the Mohammedans that you cannot distinguish from other Mohammedans? You're not going to read that. You're just going to look at pictures. This is what these dudes do. They're picture page scholars. I'm going to buy every one of them pop-up books since they like to just look at pictures. They don't like to read. He says here, I've attached the brown. It says, provided an image I attached, the brown arrows show the Eurasian input. So where's the brown arrows going into West Africa? He says it is evident that there is no direct admixture event involving West Africans. It was either a secondary or more likely a tertiary admixture event that involved already admixed nomadic groups like the Fulani or Bagara, Shuas Arabs who mix with the Niger-Congo groups. And it's so funny, the Fulani are primarily E1B1A as well. So hence why West African groups outside nomadic groups retain so little Eurasian ancestry. This also explains why groups from North Africa and East Africa maintain so much due to direct admixture events. Let's go down. And I respond. Seeing that you have a troll name, I take it that this conversation would go nowhere. In either case, there's direct gene flow into West Africa. Hello, Chad and Tobo people share those signals. And we all know Chad and Tobo people are West and Central African people. And he tries to get around this. Watch this. And the archaeology shows that northern influences penetrated West Africa in ancient times. All you can say is nuh-uh, but the evidence does support that. Science isn't determinism. I provide a quote from David Wright, 2020. It says, the chronology of the archaeological record at Shumlaka suggests a possible northern influence on cultural developments during the SMA Stone and Metal Age. These include changes in stone tools, which can be interpreted as a fusion of local LSA, late Stone Age tool-making traditions, with new macrolithic technologies introduced from the north, and the appearance of ceramics, 4 shards found in the early SMA burial layer, and more abundant and distinct ceramics in the later SMA deposits, potentially related to earlier pottery working traditions in the Sahara and the Sahel. And that's per David Wright, 2020. Unlike you, I don't rely solely on pictures. I read the actual papers, and I gave him a direct quote from a paper. And then I says, LOL, some African Americans are Tobo and Chadic. Those are West/Central African groups, which kills your assertion. You're finished, dude. Which this is what I'm going to do this. What I'm going to deal with is the Chadic and Tobo genetic inputs, because this guy is about to put his foot all the way in his mouth. I says, maybe if you spent more time reading and trolling on Facebook, you would know this information. Then he responds, okay, bookworm, Show me where in any historical document, book, or genetic studies it states that Tobu were enslaved during the transatlantic slave trade, and the African Americans are descended from them. I can't wait to see this nonsense. Again, I said Chad and Tobu, but we will show you both. We'll show you both. Watch this. Watch this. This is how you kill a troll. All you do is post images. I'm going to actually read. You know, it's so easy. All you got to do is just read the information. And then boom. So first, where are these people located? The Tobo people are located where? They're located in Chad. Is there a history of slavery in Chad? Yes, it actually is. It actually is. But remember, all I got to do is prove that African Americans descend from them. That's pretty easy. But let's just talk about this. This is historycentral.com, nation by nation, Chad history. I'm just going to start with something light. Put this in the chat. I actually read. If people don't, they rely on images. And that's why y'all don't even know what the damn images show you, because you don't read. You just look at pictures. Just look at pictures. All you do. So in this article here, let's see, blowing up 150. It says here, close. What the hell? It says here, of course. Why would you do that in the middle of me trying to present this? It says here, a nation-long history on history, but the short on development. Chad has faced serious difficulties over the centuries since ancient settlements were supplanted by kingdoms of Canaan, Barnu, Bagrimi, and Wadai. For 300 years, beginning in 1500, the slave trade was active in the area, with Arab raiders providing slaves for European traders. So there you go. You do have slaves coming from that region. What they got to do with African Americans? Who do you think the European traders are? What do you think the European traders are going to do with these damn slaves? They're going to relocate them to the Americas and other colonies, even in Europe and stuff of that nature. So yes, you have African American people, but maybe that's not enough for you, right? Maybe that's not enough. Let me just go to my Kindle real quick. Again, we actually read. You don't. That's the difference, and that's why it's so easy to bust you dudes and expose you guys. You speak in absolutes and you set yourself up for the okey doke every damn time. Every time. So here's my Kindle. This is the book, Slave Trades, 1500 to 1800, An Expanding World, the European Impact on World History, 1450 to 1800. And we're going to go to page 58, where it talks about the Maghreb trans-Saharan trade. It says here, Table 2 provides the rather extensive data which have been found for the trade which brought African peoples across the Sahara to Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and especially Libya. It said the sources of this trade were the populations living at or mainly south of the Sudanic region, stretching from the Atlantic coast of Africa as far east as present-day Chad. That's how expansive this slave trade is. Well, what's going to be your excuse now? What's going to be your excuse now? The next excuse. Because all y'all do is ad hoc, post hoc arguments and move goalposts all day. What's going to be the excuse now? We know the slave trade had that influence. And just like my brother Avery says, yeah, there are African Americans with topogenetic ancestry and DNA. This guy clearly knows nothing about DNA. Exactly. And I'm just slowly building up to this. So let me close that. All right. Now, that's deal with Tobo again and Chadic influences in African Americans. Let's deal with it. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to go over this article here. Because we already dealt with how expansive that slave trade was, and that Arabs were providing, or there were slave raiders that were providing these slaves to the European traders. And we know where the European traders took these damn slaves. So this is not no damn secret. Searching for the roots of the first free American community. Before we go here, African American community. Let's go to the wiki article of the Tobo people. I don't know why I keep sharing my screen like this. Chrome tab, Tobo people. There we go. Boom. Let's go here. So the Tobo people, which you're like, oh yeah, show African American descending from them. They're a very small population, 250,000, right? About 125,000 in Chad, 50 to 85,000 in Libya, and about 40,000 in Niger. And if we go down to the genetics, which is the paper we're going to read a little later here, it tells you their genetic makeup. It says, according to the study published in the American Journal of Human Genetics, Haber et al. 2016, that examined why DNA haplogroups from samples obtained from 75 Tobo men, haplogroups associated with paternal Eurasian ancestry were present at rates of 34% for R1b, 31% for T1a, and 1% for J1. The African associated EM78 were present at rates of 28%. Can we find any of these haplogroups in African Americans? Yes, we can. We actually can find all of them. It says, while EM81 appeared at a rate of 5%, the study also found that 20 to 30% of Tobo's autosomal DNA was Eurasian in origin, and the African ancestral component was best represented by Lyell-speaking populations. The most likely source of this Eurasian DNA, according to the analysis, would be a population originating among Near Eastern farmers during the Neolithic Revolution. In contrast, Near Eastern populations scored African ancestry at a rate of 7 to 14%, Yemen to 0.5% Lebanese Christians. Other ethnic groups in Chad, such as the Sara people and Lyell speakers, had considerably low Eurasian admixture at only 0.3% to 2% and 1.25 to 4.5% Lyell. And when we get to the paper, it explains why it's a different admixture event. It's because of time, like I was trying to tell you. The time of the admixture events are different. I kept trying to tell you that. You didn't want to listen because you guys don't read the information, so you don't understand it. So we see these haplogroups, right? So let's go back to the searching roots of the first free African American community paper. Now I drop this in the chat. All right. Let's remember the claim is that, there's no Chad or Tobu descendants amongst African Americans. Let's read the abstract, which is always the summation of the paper, right? San Basilio de Palenque is an Afro-descendant community near Cartagena, Colombia, founded in the 16th century. The recognition of the historical and cultural importance of Palenque has promoted several studies, namely concerning the African roots of its first inhabitants. To deepen the knowledge of the origin and diversity of the Palenque parental lineages, we analyzed a sample of 81 individuals for the entire mtDNA control region, as well as 92 individuals for 27 YSTRs and 95 for 51 Y SNPs. The results confirm the strong isolation of the Palenque with some degree of influx of Native American maternal lineages and a European admixture exclusively mediated by men. Due to the high genetic drift observed, a pairwise F statistic analysis with available data on African populations proved to be inadequate for determining population affinities. In contrast, when a phylogenetic approach was used, it was possible to infer the phylogeographic origin of some lineages in Palenque, contradicting previous studies indicating a single African origin. Our results evidence parental genetic contributions from widely different African regions, and this is where you die at. This is where you die at with this argument. Let's go down. Let's go all the way down. And let's go to the part where it parses out the Y chromosome DNA, the genetic diversity. Let's go down. As you can see, these people have they have B2A, E1A, E1B1A, M191, which is a more central Sahelian E1B1A marker. It's there. And you're acting as if, how the hell they in Central Africa? How did they get into the slave trade? We can see them. We can see them in African American. We see the lineages literally in African Americans. What is M191 doing there? M2, M35. What is E1B1B, M35 doing there? What is it doing there? R1B, VA8, that's Chadic. What is it doing there? African Americans are those descendants. The reason why you and people die on your sword all the time, people like you always die on your sword, is because you guys are absolutists. You're not studying. You're not doing any of that. All you're doing is trying to run with your presuppositions. You think African Americans are homogenous. No, they're not. You think West Africans are homogenous. No, they are not. They're diverse. So we see R1B-VA8, which is a Chadic lineage amongst these people, amongst African American descendants. Okay, you got M81. What's M81 doing there? And M123. What is M123 doing there? Which is associated with Jews. What is it doing there? And yeah, you are correct. You do see I1B and all that, I2 and GM201, R1A, R1B, M529, R1B, S116, and R1B, U152. And then you see the Native American Q1A, M3. What is this paper called? What is this paper called? Searching for the Roots of the First African American Community. Free African American Community. All right, so we're going to go down where it breaks down each of these groups. All right. You see slavery from slaves come from Mozambique there as well, but I want to go all the way down to where it breaks down RVA, which you think nobody descends from, or the E1B1B groups, which would be related to the Tobo and the Chadic groups. There's no way around it. Anyway. So it says here, Clade E is the most common clade in Africa and is also present in European and Western Asian populations. And of course, with the Palanque African background, this clade represents 61% of the Y lineages and 82.76% of those assigned to an African origin. The haplogroup E1B1B M81 is frequent in North Africa, particularly in Berber groups, and is also present in Iberia and southern Italy as a Northwest African legacy, which we do find in these African Americans. You found this in these African Americans. It says, since no direct gene flow from North Africa has been reported, the presence of the haplogroup in Palanque population will most likely result from European admixture. Nonetheless, a Northern African origin of EM81 in Palanque via Western Africa cannot be ruled out. Because again, science is probabilistic, not deterministic. A European origin was also attributed to the haplogroup E1B1B M123 lineages found in Palanque. This haplogroup is absent in sub-Saharan Africa and frequent in Arabian populations from Northeast Africa and the Middle East. This haplogroup also spread in Europe, although at low frequencies. In Iberia, it has been associated with Middle Eastern, North African, and Jewish ancestry. A direct origin in Africa can be attributed to the remaining E haplogroups in Palanque: E1A, M33, E1B1A, M2, M154, X, M154, M191. Now, what does that X mean? That means M2 is ancestral to those. For anybody watching. It does not mean excluding, you dumbasses. E1B1A, M191, E1B1B, M35, X, M78, M81, M123, V6, M293, meaning M35 is ancestral to those lineages, which are not present in European populations, were more likely brought to America during the slave trade. Apart from E1B1A M81, E1B1B M123 attributed to the European influx inside the E1B1B clade, we found 3 samples belonging to E1B1B M35, M78, M81, M123, V6, and M293. Although an African origin of this lineage is more likely, we cannot exclude the hypothesis that it came from Europe, as rare E1B1B M35 subclades harboring V1515, V257, or V2009 mutations were detected in populations in the Western Mediterranean region, namely Portugal, Spain, France, and Italy. And I'm still trying to figure out, like, why are African Americans possessing these haplogroups? You told me they wouldn't, or they shouldn't. These are African Americans having M123, M81. Come on, man. E1B1BM35 is present in East and Southern African populations. It was not detected in the Central Southwest regions, namely Niger, Nigeria, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, and Angola, although it was described in West Africa at low frequencies. The E1B1BM35 network shows many separated branches, some of which are restricted to a single African origin. The high diversity and wide dispersal of African populations is explained by the low resolution of the data available and most likely represents diverse E1B1BM35 sublineages. From the network, we can see that the samples from pollen cave represented by a single haplotype are positioned in a branch that is rooted in a haplotype shared between sample from Burkina Faso and Ethiopia. It's African Americans. What are they doing with these genes? What are they doing with these Y chromosomes? You told me it's not possible. Apart from the samples, this is why you don't do absolutism. This is why you get cracked upside the head easily. So apart from the samples from pollen cave, this branch comprises one sample from Senegal, one from Benin, 3 from Guinea-Bissau, and 2 from Burkina Faso. The results obtained are thus compatible with a single founder who is more likely to have come from a region between Senegambia and the Bight of Benin than from other African regions. Now, let's go down to RV88. Remember, he told me we're not supposed to see this in African Americans. African Americans are not descendants of the Chanics or Tobel. That's what he told me. He told me, show me that. Maybe if you spent more time reading, then you wouldn't have this conundrum. You're just looking for pictures and graphs. Anyway, this is the silly shit at this point. I don't have to continue the story. I don't have to continue the narrative. It's just stop it right here. There's no point in keep reading when you guys don't read at all. And I keep saying, I say this all the time. I ain't got to know it all. I just got to know more than you. That's it. That's what makes this so simple. You guys are a bunch of picture pages scholars.
Picture pages, time to get your picture pages, time to get your crayons and your pencils. Picture pages, open up your picture pages, time to watch Bill Cosby do a picture page with you.
All right. We actually read here, man. We actually read. So let's get back to the reading. It says here, haplogroup R1BVA8 was found in 6.15% of the African lineages in pollen cave. Clade R, originated outside of Africa, has high frequencies in European populations. However, except for rare sublineages, the R1BVA8 subclade is essentially restricted to the African continent with high frequencies in the Central Sahel populations. In sub-Saharan Africa, this haplogroup has the highest frequencies in Northern Cameroon Chadic groups. In Western Africa, this haplogroup was also found in Gabon and Equatorial Guinea, and is absent in the southern populations. Based on this geographic distribution, diversity levels in different regions, haplogroup R1BVA8 has been associated with the trans-Saharan spread of proto-Chadic populations during the early mid-Holocene. A network was built using the available information on 56 African samples from haplogroup R after excluding samples that were assigned to sublineages outside the R1BVA8 branch and believed to result from recent European migration. All 4 samples from pollen cave share a YSTR haplotype, which is located close to 4 out of the 7 R1BVA8 chromosomes found in the Punu people from Gabon. 2 are separated by a single-step mutation, 2 by 2 steps. In the same cluster is also 1 sample from Equatorial Guinea and another from Benin. Both are 2 steps apart from the pollen cave samples. The results obtained are compatible with a single founder from Western Africa. Close haplotypes were found spread along the Bights of Benin and Biafra and along the Longo coast. The closest genetic proximity was found with 2 samples from Punu speakers, putting their most likely origin in the current region of Gabon. Why do we see African? Again, this paper is about African American descendants of pollen cave. What is the paper labeled? Searching for the roots of the first African American community. And we see all these different haplogroups. They're very diverse. R1BVA8, different E1B1B subclades. Why do we see that? Why is that there? Why? Why do we see that? Huh? And here's a breakdown of where they believe each of these haplogroups may have came from. The R1BV8 they believe was between a bite of Benin and Luongo. Then you got certain people saying there were no slaves coming from Luongo. That's just dumb. I don't understand you guys. You guys don't make no damn sense. So this green area to this orange area is where they believe we start getting this R1B V8, which makes sense because the slave trade is coming from Central Africa all the way to the Atlantic coast. As we read in the source earlier, it makes sense that you start seeing VAA and Chadic related lineages getting caught up, which would include Tobo people, which would include Chadic people getting caught up in the slave trade as well. It's very, very simple. This is not hard stuff to understand. So now let's read about the Chadic and Tobo peoples. Let's just read about that, man. It's just extra. The point was already made here. Let me go here. Chad genetic diversity reveals an African history marked by multiple Holocene Eurasian migrations. I can give you this paper as well. And this paper is very, very key because it says something about the migration of Eurasians that pretty much kills this idiot. It says here, understanding human genetic diversity in Africa is important for interpreting the evolution of all humans. Yet vast regions in Africa, such as Chad, remain genetically poorly investigated. Here we use genotype data from 480 samples from Chad, the Near East, and Southern Europe, as well as whole genome sequencing from 19 of them, to show that many populations today derive their genomes from ancient African Eurasian admixtures. We found evidence of early Eurasian backflow to Africa in people speaking the unclassified isolate Lyao language in southern Chad, and estimate from linguistic equilibrium decay that this occurred 4,750 to 7,200 years ago. It brought a Y chromosome. It brought to Africa Y chromosome lineage R1BV8, whose closest relatives are widespread and present in Eurasia. We estimate from a sequence data that Chad R1BV8 Y chromosome correlates 5,700 to 7,300 years ago. This migration could thus have originated among Near Eastern farmers during the African humid period. We also found that previously documented Eurasian backflow into Africa, which occurred approximately 3,000 years ago and was thought to be mostly limited to East Africa, had a more westward impact, affecting populations in northern Chad, such as Tobo, who have 20 to 30% Eurasian ancestry today. Because he tried to make this argument too, and you clearly not reading. It says a more western impact. It says, we observe a decline in heterozygosity in admixed Africans and found that Eurasian admixture can bias inferences on their correlation history and confound genetic signals from adaptation, archaic introgression. Anyway. Yeah, man. Science does refute it easily. It's not even. It's when someone doesn't read. It's just, again, I don't got to know it all. I just got to know more than you. That's it. It's just that simple. And this is why they don't want to have formal debates. Introduction. African genetic diversity is still incompletely understood, and vast regions of Africa remain genetically undocumented. Chad, for example, makes up approximately 5% of Africa's surface area, and its central location connecting sub-Saharan Africa with North and East Africa positions it to play an important role as a crossroad or barrier to human migrations. However, Chad has been little studied at a whole genome level, and its position within African genetic diversity is not well known. With 200 ethnic groups and more than 120 indigenous languages and dialects, Chad has extensive ethno-linguistic diversity. It has been suggested that the diversity can be attributed to Lake Chad, which has attracted human populations to its fertile surroundings since prehistoric times, especially after the progressive desiccation of the Sahara starting approximately 7,000 years ago. So when the Sahara begins to shrink and become a desert, that's when they start seeing these migrations. As important questions about Africa's ethnic diversity are the relationships among the different groups and the relationships between cultural groups and existing genetic structures. In the present study, we analyzed 4 Chadian populations with different ethnicities, languages, and modes of subsistence. Our samples are likely to capture recent genetic signals of migration and mixing, and also have the potential to show ancestral genomic relationships that are shared among Chadians and other populations. An additional major question relates to the prehistoric Eurasian migrations to Africa. What was the extent of these migrations? How have they affected the African genetic diversity? And what present-day populations harbor genetic signals from the ancient migrating Eurasians? We have previously reported evidence of gene flow from the Near East to East Africa approximately 3,000 years ago, as well as subsequent selection of Ethiopians on non-African derived alleles related to light skin pigmentation. A recent attempt to quantify the extent of such backflow in Africa more generally by using ancient DNA suggested that the impact of Eurasian migration was mostly limited to East Africa. However, previous studies using mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomes in populations from the Chad Basin found some with a East African origin and or Mediterranean and Eurasian influence. An analysis based on genome-wide data found a non-African component suggested to be from East Africa and Central Sahelian populations. Thus, studying diverse Chadian populations on a whole genome level presents an opportunity to shed more light on the history of African Eurasian mixtures, including whether or not selection after admixture is a widespread phenomenon in Africa, and how the historical events in Chad are related to events that have occurred elsewhere in Africa and the Near East. In this work, we present genetic data set of 480 Chadian, Near Eastern, and European individuals genotype at 2.5 million SNPs, in addition to high coverage whole genome sequences from 19 of these individuals. From Chad, we studied the Tobu, who are nomads from northern Chad and speak a Nilo-Saharan language, the Sahara, who are a sedentary population from southern Chad and also speak a Nilo-Saharan language, and the Lyell speakers, a population of just 750 individuals who speak an unclassified language, isolate, and live in southern Chad. We do have West Africans that cluster with Nilo-Saharan speakers too. Just to throw that out there. It says, in an urban population from the capital city of N'Djamena. In addition to the Chadians, we included Greek, Lebanese, and Yemen samples whose locations and history suggest that they might be informative about early African Eurasian migration. We use this data set to advance our understanding of human genetic diversity in Africa and neighboring regions by focusing on population migration and mixing, and how the admixture process has shaped present-day genetic variation. You know, if it wasn't for the field of genomics, you know, these people would just say sub-Saharan Africans are all the same, man. It wouldn't give them any diversity because that's the racism coming out, right? It says here samples were collected from Chad, 238, Lebanon, 126, 96 samples from Greece, and 20 samples from Yemen. Details can be found in Table S1. All samples, except from those from Greece, were genotyped with Lumina Human Omni 2.5 8B chip, which covers 2.5 million SNPs. Greek genotype information for the 2.5 million sites were extracted from sequence data and merged with array data from other populations. In addition, 19 samples were a whole genome sequence at less than 30 times depth with Illumina. Genotyping sequences were completed at the Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute. Informed consent was obtained from the study subjects, and the use of the samples in genetic studies was approved by the Human Materials and Data Management Committee. Blasey. I don't think that's too important. Here's a map of where these people are here. Let me see if I can download full-size image or high res to see. So as you can see, this is where the sample populations are taken from. We see the Tobu in northern Chad, the Sahara, Laos, and southern Chad, Lebanon, Greece, and Yemen. All right, and then you see their PC charts over here. All right, so let me go back. Population locations and genetic structure. Population A, the map shows the location of newly genotype or sequence populations, as you can see here. PCA B is the PCA of worldwide population, show that Near Easterners and East Africans are intermediate to Eurasians and Sub-Saharan Africans. Chad populations are close to Sub-Saharan Africans and have some samples drawn toward Ethiopians. It says here in C, the magnification of African PCA shows different affinities of the Chad population to other Africans. The Tobo cluster close to Ethiopians, whereas the Sahara and Lao speakers are close to Yoruba. The mixed samples from the N'Djamena the capital are intermediate to the Tobo, Sara, and Lao speakers. And that's another thing. You can tell he didn't read anything on this because those people are close to Yoruba. These people with these Eurasian, harbor these Eurasian genes. It says the genotyping data were merged with data from African Genome Variation Project. That's another paper that we read that shows that West Africans also have Eurasian admixture. The 1,000 Genome Project and Pagini et al., resulting in a combined data set of 1.1 million SNPs and 2,453 samples. Analysis, including ancient genomes, involved merging the panel described above with the Hayek et al. Data set, resulting in 90,000 SNPs and common comparative whole genome sequence were obtained from Pagani et al. In complete genomics. Genotype data were processed with Plink. The SNP genotype success rate required was set to 99%, whereas SNP with a minor allele frequency less than 0.0001 or Hardy-Weinberg p-value less than 0.00001 were removed. Genotypes from sequence data were called with SAM tools version 1.2 and BCF tools with the command SAM tools Impala negative cube 20. This is just their technology they're using. Let's go down to population structure and gene flow. The principal components were computed with Eisenstahl version 4.2. Effective population size and rates of gene flow were inferred by multiple sequentially Markovian correlations approach. Again, this is more of how they came to those PCAs and whatnot. Let's go down. Phylogenetic analysis of the whole Y chromosome sequences were carried out as described in Bergstrom et al. Internal node ages were estimated with the row statistic converted to units of years by application of a Y chromosome mutation rate of 0.76 times 10 to the negative 9 power. And this is why I also want y'all, I want to point this out. So sometimes it is good to read the materials and methods because they use different rates, so they come with different dates. Someone else, they asked me in a show I did like maybe 2 weeks ago, why do I see different dates for the origin or divergence of some of these haplogroups? And the reason why is because they're estimates. And the estimates are based on mutational rates. And they set the mutational rate. We don't know. The mutation rate is not known. Right? That's always going to be a variable. That's why you see different dates. Admixture analysis, measure of heterozygosity, selection after admixture, blase. It says evidence for positive selection was tested with the population branch statistic with correction for the long-term effective population size. We constructed a tree with the Tobo population branch from the Lao speakers and the Chinese Han as an outgroup. We collected values above the 95th percentile of the PBS distribution. Look for variants previously reported on the putative selection of Europeans. Results. Genetic structure in Chad indicates a complex admixture history. We perform an initial exploration of our data set by using principal component analysis. The first component, PC1, captured the genetic differentiation between Africans and Eurasians. Populations such as the Near Easterners and North and East Africans fell between the Europeans and Sub-Saharan Africans. The Chadian groups lay near the Sub-Saharan Africans. The Sara and Lao speakers clustered tightly with Sub-Saharan Africans, such as the Yoruba, whereas the Tobo were somewhat more distant and appeared drawn towards East Africans, such as the Ethiopians. Samples collected from the capital of Chad in Jamina appeared in a central position between Tobo cluster and Sar Lyall cluster. Many individuals from the Jamina have not reported their ethnicity or have reported a mixed ethnic origin. Therefore, a recent mixture could be responsible for their position on the PCA. We further investigated the genetic variation in Chad by estimating changes in the effective population size over time via the MSMC approach. Eurasians and Africans diverged around 60 to 80,000 years ago and subsequently had different patterns of population size changes. In particular, compared with Africans, the Eurasian population experienced a sharp decrease in size 60,000 years ago. We observed this expected pattern in most populations in our data set, but a few stood out. Number one, Egyptians had a population bottleneck that was much more pronounced than that of other Africans, but not as sharp as of that of Eurasian population. Number two, the Tobo and Ethiopians shared a very similar pattern during the bottleneck. They were close to other Africans, but had somewhat sharper decrease in population size. We would not expect such different fluctuations in population sizes at 60,000 years ago and populations who shared a common origin during this period. For example, all Eurasians traced their origin to a population who exited Africa 60,000 years ago. And this is reflected in indistinguishable NE patterns during this period, which we also observed in the CEU, Greeks, and Lebanese. As expected, a shared pattern of the NE in ancient times was also observed in the Sahara Lao speakers and other Africans, such as the Yoruba. We suggest that the deviation from the expected NE pattern in the Tobo is related to extensive admixture history with Eurasians, like the Eurasian admixtures in Ethiopians. We explore this possibility directly with admixture tests below. And again, when you read this, it said the Yoruba, the Sahara Lao speakers, they share this pattern that you see in all other non-Africans, which is this is why you have to take out your time to read this. This is very telling. Which goes with another paper about the admixture of non-Africans into Africans, which reveals the Neanderthal component that we do see in Yoruba. Figure 2 is population size estimates from whole genome sequences. Population sizes were inferred by MSMC and analysis with 4 haplotypes from each population. Eurasian population had a distinctive bottleneck at the time of their exodus from Africa 60,000 years ago compared to other Africans, admixed Africans from a Eurasian gene flow, such as Egyptians, Ethiopians, and the Tobo also showed a decline in population size during the same period. Multi-Eurasian admixtures in Africa after 6,000 years ago. We have previously reported massive gene flow approximately 3,000 years ago from Eurasians to Ethiopian populations. Here we reassess the presence of Eurasian ancestry in Africa by using F3 statistics in the form of F3X Eurasian Yoruba, where a negative value with a z-score less than or greater than -4 indicates that X is a mixture of Africans and Eurasians. We found it as expected that most Ethiopians are a mixture of Africans and Eurasians. An exception is the Gumu's population, where Gumu's Eurasian Yoruba is always positive. The Gumu's language belongs to the Nilo-Saharan family, which could have isolated the Gumu's from the Afro-Asiatic speaking Ethiopians. However, we found that the Tobo and Chad, who also speak a Nilo-Saharan language, are a mixture of Africans and Eurasians, making the F3 statistic Tobo, Eurasian, and Yoruba always significantly negative. This suggests that the impact of Eurasian migration today extends beyond East Africa and the Afro-Asiatic speaking populations. We did not detect significant z-scores greater than -4 Eurasian admixture in the Sahara, Nilo-Saharan language family, or the Lao speakers unclassified language with the use of the F3 statistic. Lowest z-score for the Sahara was less than -2.9. For the Lao speakers, z-scores were all positive. However, this statistic loses sensitivity with small mixture proportions and post-admixture drift, which I was trying to explain to him about that post-admixture drift in the Facebook post. It says, so positive values from the F3 statistics do not necessarily reflect the complete absence of admixture. We thus further tested for admixture by using Alder and Mulder, which assess admixture-induced linkage disequilibrium, LD, and can detect small mixture proportions from a substantially diverged reference possibly missed by the F3 statistic. Alder detected admixture in the Tobo, Sahara, and Lao speakers. Mulder, which has the potential to determine whether or not the admixture LD in the population is best represented as a result of one of the multiple mixtures, showed that 2 mixture events had occurred in the Tobo. The first event occurred 2,850 to 3,500 years ago, z-score equal 11, a time close to the date of mixture in East Africans 2,500 to 2,700 years ago. The second mixture event occurred much more recently at 170 to 260 years ago. In southern Chad, we detected mixture events that were more ancient than those in the north. Mixture occurred 3,900 to 4,800 years ago. Z-score equal 10. In Sahara, 4,750 to 7,200 years ago with a z-score equaling 5. In the Lao speakers, these time estimates overlap, and we interpret them as signals from the same admixture event, whose time and distant past was estimated more reliably in the loudspeakers because they carry more Eurasian ancestry, 1.25% to 4.5%, than the SARA, 0.3% to 2%. See estimates of admixture proportions below. Even though the SARA have smaller standard errors because of their larger sample size, in particular, we suggested the Eurasian mixture event in the SARA loudspeakers are independent of the mixture event in East Africans and the Tobu for two reasons. So this is something I wanted to point out because you have different. This is showing you different ways of Eurasians coming in because these are independent mixture events. And he was trying to say earlier that they get it inadvertently or indirectly, but you have two different events here. So let's read it. It says event number one, admixture LD showed that the events in southern Chad preceded the events in East Africa by 2 to 4,500 years. And two, we found in Chad a Eurasian Y chromosome lineage, R1BVA8, that had penetrated all Chadian populations examined, but was absent or rare from Ethiopians examined. From a whole Y chromosome sequences, we estimate that the Chadian R1BVA8 chromosome sample emerged 5,700 to 7,300 years ago, a time comparable to the loudspeaker admixture dates 4,750 to 7,200 years ago, estimated from genome-wide LDK patterns. Then it gives you this map here. Let me see if I can download this here. So you guys can see it. R1B being introduced into this region. You see the clay VA8 into the Tobu, the Lao. So when you say, show the Tobu descendant in African Americans, we can because they have the RVA8 signal. They have the Y chromosome of the Tobu and the Chadic people. This was so easy to do. This is so easy. This is not hard stuff to do. And as you can see, the signal coming from Eurasia. You can see it penetrating into Western Central Africa right there into Chad. Boom, boom, boom. There's your evidence. There's your evidence. And then you can use the Fulani. We know the Fulani migrated over from Ethiopia. They have an east to west client. He went from Ethiopia to modern West Africa as well. You use them as well. So why are we having this conversation again? As we showed earlier, let me go back. Let me go back to this paper about the first free African American community. RVA8 is found amongst that community. And they believe they probably were shipped from between Senegambia and the Bight of Benin. This guy said, there's no African Americans that descend from these people. Yes, they do. There it is. Do you need any more proof than that? Maybe you should spend more time reading. Maybe you should spend more time reading instead of just posting images. All right. So back to the paper. It tells you that the timing of the Eurasian admixture and events. A is the crosses represent significant admixture events in the history of the Tobu, Amhara, Sara, and Lao speakers. Time of admixture is estimated from the LD by Alder when all pairs of African Eurasian populations in our data set as references. Mulder extends Alder inference by detecting multiple mixture events, such as in the case of the Tobu population, shown here in the green lozenges right there. B is a maximum likelihood tree, shows the males belonging to haplogroup R1b in 1,000 genome project and the R1b males in our data set. The number of samples is shown on each branch tip. We estimate that the Chadian R1b emerged 5,700 to 7,300 years ago, where most R1b haplogroups emerged 7,300 to 9,400 years ago. The African Eurasian lineages correlate 17,900 to 23,000 years ago. And C shows you putative sources and time of admixture of Eurasian ancestry in Chad, East Africa, which is this map to the right here. All right, simple stuff, man. Sources Eurasian backflow into Chad and East Africa are correlated. Previous studies have suggested Eurasian backflow into East Africa came from a population related to early Neolithic farmers. We want to know whether the Eurasian ancestry we found in the Tobu, which we attribute to a mixture close to in time to the date of mixture in East Africans, can be traced to the same source population that influenced Ethiopia. We performed the test F3 Tobu Yoruba X and F3 Amhara Yoruba X, where X is the present-day non-sub-Saharan African population in our data set and is related to one that contributed ancestry to the Tobu and Amhara. Z-score greater than -4. We then looked at the correlation of the F3 statistic values between the two tests. We found that the Eurasian source population for the Amhara and Tobu were highly correlated, and that the most significant result was for present-day Sardinians. Exception to this correlation were the North African populations, Tunisian, Mozambique, Algerians, and the Sahrawi. We appeared to have contributed more ancestry, to the Tobu than to the Amhara. We repeated the test by using published ancient genomes and also found a high correlation of Eurasian sources for the Amhara and Tobu. Early Neolithic farmers were the most significant contributors, as reported previously. When we substituted the Amhara with other Ethiopians, the Walana and Oromo, we found similar results. In a parallel comparison, we checked whether the sources of the African ancestry in different Near Eastern populations were also correlated. We tested Lebanese British X and F3 Yemeni British X, and found a lower correlation of the F3 values, suggesting a more complicated history of gene flow from genetically different Africans to different populations in the Near East. We got a graph here. It says here, figure 4, sources of the Eurasian ancestry in Chad and Ethiopia. The plot shows significant Eurasian sources for the Tobu and Amhara according to 3 potential population test scores greater than -4. An increase in the absolute value of the F3 statistics implies an increase in the genetic affinity of Eurasian population X to the Tobu and Amhara. With the exception of the North Africans who showed increased affinity to the Tobu, present-day populations show correlated affinity to both the Tobu and Amhara. Among modern populations, Sardinians showed the highest genetic affinity to both Tobu and Amhara. Ancient Eurasians also show correlated affinity to both the Tobu and Amhara. The early Neolithic LBK, or linear pottery population, approximately 5000 BCE, had the highest affinity. We next quantified the proportion of African Eurasian mixture in the study populations by using 2 methods. Admixture supervised with K = 2 in the British and Yoruba as ancestral populations, and 2 to F4 ratio, A = F4, British Chimp, X Yoruba. Where X is one of the populations in our data set, the results from the 2 sets were highly correlated. Eurasian ancestry was estimated at 26 to 30% in the Tobu, and 0.3 to 2% in the Sahara, and 1.2 to 4.5% in the Lao speakers. Eurasian ancestry in Ethiopians range from 11 to 12% in the Gumuz and to 53 to 57% in the Amhara. African ancestry in the Near East range from 7 to 14% in Yemen to 0.7 to 0.5% in Lebanese Christians. It says Eurasian gene flow shaped the genomes of admixed Africans. Our results from the PCA and MSMC analysis show the deviation of the admixed population from the patterns observed in unadmixed or less admixed populations in the same geographical region. The MSMC analysis in particular showed that admixed Africans had patterns indicative of a decline in heterozygosity, increased bottleneck 60,000 years ago, somewhat similarly to Eurasians. We tested whole genome heterozygosity in these populations and found that it decreased in admixed Africans according to their Eurasian ancestry. This decrease was not related to recent inbreeding, given that removing segments with long runs of homozygosity did not change the overall pattern. Our simulations suggest that decay in heterozygosity is expected after gene flow from a population with diversity comparable to that of the Eurasians. We further investigated heterozygosity in admixed Africans by assessing heterozygosity of different ancestral segments in the Tobu genome. We found that admixed African-Eurasian segments had more heterozygosity. The segments of the genome where African haplotypes were present. However, the Tobu genome segments with complete Eurasian ancestry, Eurasian, had considerably lower heterozygosity, leading to the genome-wide pattern of decay in heterozygosity observed in Africans with Eurasian ancestry. We want to understand the consequence of admixture on the models that use the density of heterozygous sites to infer the demographic history of the population. We first tested whether the correlation history estimated by MSMC was affected by a small proportion of mixture, such as the African mixture found in Greeks and Lebanese, ranging 0 to 5%. We tested the Greek, Lebanese, CEU, and CHB, Han Chinese, and Beijing, China, split times from, and CEU just means Northern Europe for anybody listening, right? That's like Northern Europeans or Central Europeans, whatever, right? It says split times from the Yoruba and found that all populations split from Yoruba 70 to 80,000 years ago, implying that low proportions of African admixture in Greek and Lebanese did not detectably affect the estimates of relative cross correlations rates. We next tested the Tobu, who have 30% Eurasian ancestry. The Tobu appeared to split from Eurasians 30 to 40,000 years ago, a time more recent than expected, considering the African Eurasian split 60 to 80,000 years ago. We tested other Africans in our data set and found that the Sahara, Lao speakers, and Yoruba split from Eurasians as expected 70 to 80,000 years ago. We then tested directly whether the Eurasian ancestry affected the relative cross-correlation rate between the Tobu and Eurasia by masking some of the Eurasian ancestry in the Tobu. We used PCA admix to estimate the ancestry along each chromosome and then use the identical Eurasian segments as negative mask in our analysis. The split times between the Tobu and Lebanese, for example, increased by 15,000 years, shifting the split date toward the expected African Eurasian split time. We found that in addition to influencing the relative cross-correlation rate, admixture can also inflate putative signals of positive selection. For example, using the PBS to detect recent positive selection that occurred in the Tobu after their divergence from the Yoruba, we found signals of selection on MCM6, RS4988235, a variant associated with the lactase persistent phenotype. This SNP was previously found to be under strong positive selection in Europeans, where it's probably advantageous in individuals living in pastoralist societies. The frequency of this variant in the Tobu is 2% and is absent from the sub-Saharan African and other Chadic samples, the Sahara and Lao speakers examined here. Although this SNP appears to be the candidate for selection, we suggest that it has probably drifted neutrally in the Tobu after the Eurasian gene flow. The Tobu have approximately 30% Eurasian ancestry from a population similar to the Greeks, who have 13% derived alleles RS4988235, suggesting an expectation of approximately 3.9% of the derived alleles simply from admixture. We similarly found in the Tobu signals at the HERT2 RS1129038, a major contributor to blue eye color in Europeans, as well as the signal SLC2485. You guys all know about the skin lightening gene, right? RS1834640, a major contributor to pigmentation. In addition to introducing to African populations genes that were positively selected in Europe, the recent African Eurasian admixture carried Neanderthal alleles to Central and East Africa. Neanderthals are closer to Amhara than to Yoruba. Neanderthals are closer to the Tobu than to Yoruba. On the other hand, we found that Neanderthals are closer to Europeans than to Near Easterners. We estimated that archaic ancestry proportions by using the ratio, and found that Neanderthal ancestry was 0.5% in the Tobu and 1% in the Amhara. We then computed the correlation between Neanderthal ancestry proportions and the Eurasian and African ancestry proportions. We identified Neanderthal ancestry and mixed Africans and Near Easterners was highly correlated with Eurasian ancestry and inversely correlated with African ancestry. Figure 5, Neanderthal ancestry correlation with African Eurasian admixture. Neanderthal ancestry is not expected in Africa, yet today many Africans carry Neanderthal-derived alleles. The plot shows that the Neanderthal ancestry proportion of Africans is correlated with gene flow from Eurasians. For example, knowing that Eurasians carry approximately 2% of Neanderthal ancestry, we observed that East Africans had 1% Neanderthal ancestry and 50% Eurasian ancestry. Correspondingly, Near Easterners showed a decline in Neanderthal ancestry proportional to the levels of African ancestry. Discussion. We have generated an extensive set of genotype and high coverage whole genome sequencing data to study the genetic history of Chad and neighboring populations. We found substantial genetic differences between the ethnic groups inhabiting Chad today and suggest that multiple ancient Eurasian migrations played a major role in shaping the genetic diversity of the region. Here we discuss these migrations and how the mixed ancestry can confound proper interpretation of the evolutionary processes that occurred in their history and therefore needs to be thoroughly accounted for in the study of African genetic diversity. We detected the earliest Eurasian migration to Africa in the Lao-speaking people, an isolated language group of fewer than 800 speakers who inhabited southern Chad. We estimate that the mixture occurred 4,750 to 7,200 years ago, thus after the Neolithic transition in the Near East, a period characterized by exponential growth in human population size. Environmental changes during this period, which possibly triggered the Neolithic transition, also facilitated human migrations. The African humid period, for example, was a humid phase across North Africa that peaked 6,000, 9,000 years ago, and biogeographically connected Africa to Eurasia, facilitating human movement across these regions. In Chad, and this, real quick side note, this is why they don't want to admit that E1B1A was in the Green Sahara in North Africa, because that connects them to Eurasia, and boom, that blows up their whole idea of isolated populations, static populations, and that sub-Saharan Africans didn't have that whole idea that sub-Saharan Africans didn't have anything to do with North Africans and Eurasia. It says here, in Chad, we found a Y chromosome lineage R1BVA8, which we do find our African Americans, by the way, that we estimate emerged during the same period, 5,700 to 7,300 years ago. The closest related Y chromosome groups today are widespread in Eurasia and have been previously associated with the human expansion to Europe. We estimate that Eurasian R1b lineages initially diverged 7,300 to 400 years ago at the time of the Neolithic expansions. However, we found that African and Eurasian R1b lineages diverged 17,900 to 23,000 years ago, suggesting that the genetic structures was already established between the groups who expanded to Europe and Africa. R1BVA was previously found in Central and West Africa and was associated with a mid-Holocene migration of Afro-Asiatic speakers through the Central Sahara into the Lake Chad Basin. In the populations we examined, we found R1B in the Toubou and Sahara, who speak Nilo-Saharan languages, and also in the Lao people who speak an unclassified language. This suggests that R1b penetrated Africa independently of Afro-Asiatic language spread or passed to other groups through admixture. In addition, the early Eurasian migration to Africa approximately 6,000 years ago, a second migration 3,000 years ago affected the Toubou population in northern Chad, but had no detectable genetic impact on the other Chadian population. This migration appears to be associated with the previously reported Eurasian backflow into East Africa, given that the source population dates of mixture are similar, occurring at the start of the Iron Age. These migrations could have been facilitated by advances in warfare, transportation technology in the Near East. It is uncertain why the impact of this migration in Chad affected only Toubou. The African ancestral component in the Toubou is best represented by the Lao speaking population, suggesting that the African-Eurasian mixture probably occurred in Chad. However, ethno-linguistic barriers could have already been established at this time between the Chad groups, preventing a widespread dissemination of the Eurasian ancestry. The Toubou, despite their Islamic faith, do not show the genetic admixture detected in many of their Eastern and North African populations around 1,100 years ago, suggesting conversion without population mixing at this time. They did, however, receive additional Eurasian ancestry in the past 200 years from a source represented by North African populations such as Tunisians, Mozabites, Algerians, and the Sahrawi. This recent interaction could have been promoted by the nomadic lifestyle of the present-day Toubou and shared Muslim religion with North Africans. Unsurprisingly, we also detected a likely mixing of Chad populations and sample from the capital, which could be even more recent. Eurasian backflow in Africa thus appears to have been a recurrent event in the history of many Africans, given its considerable impact on their genomes. Although population mixture in general is a process that increases genetic diversity, we observed a decrease in heterozygosity in admixed Africans. Our simulations show that these results are expected after mixture at these proportions with the Eurasians who suffered a significant bottleneck at the time of their exodus from Africa, approximately 60,000 years ago. Consequently, we found that mixture can complicate interpretation of the correlation history inferred from models that use the density of heterozygous sites in their implementations. In addition, we detected in admixed Africans an inflation of positive selection signals on alleles associated with adult lactose tolerance. Who else has those alleles? The Fulani. And pigmentation in Europeans, but we suggest that these alleles have drifted neutrally in Africans after admixture. Furthermore, we detected Neanderthal ancestry in admixed Africans and found it to be proportional to their Eurasian ancestry. This is why they also don't want to admit that Yoruba have Neanderthal ancestry, because they don't want to admit that it's proportional to a Eurasian connection, which this does point to. Yoruba have an old Eurasian, very old Eurasian connection. We're talking about 70,000 years ago, but that's for another video, right? It says, similarly, in admixed Eurasians, we found a decrease in Neanderthal ancestry proportional to gene fold they have received from Africans. Although a higher genetic affinity to Neanderthals to Europeans than to Eurasians was previously interpreted as additional Neanderthal admixture in the history of Europeans, we propose that a more parsimonious explanation for these observations that African Eurasian mixtures both introduced Neanderthal ancestry to Africa and diluted Neanderthal ancestry in the Near East. That's huge. Says it is important to note that in this work we inevitably invoke Occam's razor to support the simplest model consistent with our data. The history of the population study here, including the time and sources of Eurasian admixture in Africa, could be more complex. Ancient DNA from Chad and neighboring regions remains a challenge given the poor DNA preservation in hot climates, but future successful efforts in ancient DNA research could provide additional insights and reveal additional complexities not considered by the modern DNA-based models favored here. Our study has shown that human genetic diversity in Africa is still incompletely understood, and that ancient admixture adds to its complexity. This work highlights the importance of exploring underrepresented populations such as those from Chad and genetic studies to improve our understanding of the demographic processes that shaped genetic variations in Africa and globally. And that's the motherfucking deal. All right. The brother said we didn't have any African Americans that were descended from Togo and Chad. So I wanted to just go ahead and just read a paper dealing with Togo and Chad. And we do have African Americans with Y chromosomes from the Togo and Chad R1BV8. Shout out to my R1BV8 carriers and whatnot. As you can see, it was found in the first free African American population in Polycay, Central America, R1BV8, and they believe it's shipped between the Bight of Benin and Luongo. And as I showed you guys in the beginning of this whole presentation, those haplogroups. Matter of fact, let me open my damn Kindle, man. Let me open my Kindle before we move on. Easily, this could have been the impetus for those haplogroups making their way to African Americans. Easily. Again, this is from the slave trade, 1500 to 1800, and the expanding world, the European impact on world history, 1450 to 1800. Page 58, it says here, the sources of this trade were the populations living at or mainly south of the Sudanic regions, stretching from the Atlantic coast of Africa as far east as present-day Chad. So we did have Chaldeans or Chadic Africans being caught in the slave trade. And the proof of that is the R1BVA8 carriers amongst African Americans. Now put that in your pipe and smoke it. And that's the motherfucking deal. Let's go to another book here. I'm gonna show you even more. I'm gonna show you even more. You know what I'm saying? Because we actually read here. These motherfuckers don't read. Y'all don't fucking read. All y'all do is post pictures. You niggas is meme scholars. That's all you are. Nothing more, nothing less. All right? Nothing more, nothing less. Let me get my other book here. You understand? Human migration. All right, let me get this book here. What does it say here? Human migration, page number 146. What does that say? African imprint on mestizo genomes. Enslaved Africans from Angola, Congo, Gambia, Guinea, Mozambique, and Senegal were brought to Mexico with the Spaniards as replacements for enslaved Native Mexicans. Due to their drastic population reduction because of diseases carried by the European colonizers, Velázquez and Nieto. Thus, Africans contributed to the genetic diversity of some Mexican genomes. Even so, Y chromosome lineages linked to African ancestry have not been broadly documented in the Mexican population. Previous studies using autosomal aims revealed that African component varied between 6.1% and 8.9%, being more prominent in coastal regions. Now, let's talk about these coastal slaves. Let's see what haplogroups they have here. Because y'all got a weird idea. Y'all think homogeny. Y'all always think homogeny when it comes to slaves, African Americans, or slave descendants, or West Africans. Y'all always think homogeny. Let's watch this. Let's see what type of haplogroups we found here. The coastal states of JL and Yucatan, right, presented the highest frequencies of haplogroup T, which has been found in MAR, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Egypt. That's part of the slave trade too. So you got African Americans with haplogroup T as a result of the slave trade. And you got African Americans with haplogroup T, period. Whether they came later or after the slave trade, it's still, your argument is flawed. African Americans descended of the Tobo? Yes, they got those haplogroups. And that's the motherfucking deal, man. We out of here, man. Yeah.
Shit, you know what's going on. You know the truth. 300 jury and above. You already know it's with me. Pull up NASCAR, I'm a speeder. I don't need her. Don't ask to play ball with me. I'm Derek Jeter. Crushing snakes in my bathing names. Got jungle fever. I just put 5 ounces in the 1 liter. Don't ask how much my jury costs. I hate dumb people. You don't know who shot your friend. We don't either. I could do a song with whoever I want. I'm from LA, so I stay with a gun. Niggas better watch their mouth when talking to me crazy. You don't know my homies shoot up babies. I got 3 Ks, I've been Ku Klux lately. You wanna fuck me, bitch, you won't pay me. I got 3 Ks, I've been Ku Klux lately. My homies is crazy, they'll shoot at babies. I've been driving whips out the DuPont lately. I've been here and I've been doing too much lately. I got 3 Ks, I've been Ku Klux lately. My homies is crazy, they'll shoot up babies. I've been driving whips out the DuPont lately. I've been here and I've been doing too much lately. Shit. I've been driving whips out the DuPont lately. Man. My homies is crazy, they'll shoot up babies. I just put a drum on the K, I've been tripping. Nigga breathe wrong, I'ma chip one of these niggas. I'm from California, LA to be specific. I'm a big dog, nigga greet me as I'm Clifford. I just caught a body in a party with the Clippers. I want Mei Ling so young and her sister. Nigga come I'm tripping by the bitch, I'ma chip him. We take camera phones in the booth cause bitch is tricky. Age ain't nothing but a number, the 17 is with me. If he graduated then his 17 gon' hit him. I pull up in a super sport, I had to go and get him. Can't talk about what happened next, just Lord forgive me. I got 3 Ks, I've been Ku Klux lately. My homies is crazy, they'll shoot at babies. I've been driving whips out the DuPont lately. I've been here and I've been doing too much lately. I got 3 Ks, I've been Ku Klux lately. My homies is crazy, they'll shoot up babies. I've been driving whips out the DuPont lately. I've been here and I've been doing too much lately. Shit, man. I've been driving whips out the DuPont lately. Man. My homies is crazy, they'll shoot up babies. Shit, man. You know what the fuck going on, nigga? 300 and above, 2 whips. Like, what's next for me? Like, I'm not playing with these niggas, I'm from LA, nigga. Nigga better not tell me nothing, I do songs whatever the fuck I want to, nigga. Yeah, at the end of the day, y'all gotta come out here. Shit, we don't gotta go nowhere else. Shit. Stop playing with me. I'm not the one to play with. Yeah. Put a drum on that, my youth.